Warren, what's going on?
That's always a challenging question for
Right.
me to answer there. So maybe I'll flip it around. What's going on with you, Will?
We're just, it's early October in the Northwest US, so I'm getting ready for my first winter in 15 years because I've been living down in Arizona for 15 years. And so now I'm like, oh, wow, there's this winter stuff I got to do. And I'm trying to figure it out, hopefully before it becomes a limiting factor in my personal life choices.
It's a whole set of lifestyle that you need to be able to adapt to. Like it's not just you have like one set of clothes that you can wear all the time. You need like fall clothes and spring clothes and winter clothes. And so that's like
Right.
actually four sets of like your life that you need to have prepared. But actually, yesterday it was so warm here that I regretted not wearing shorts, which that's October 7th in Switzerland.
Yeah, that seems a bit unusual.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was got really cold here already, but there was sort of this anomaly day.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the different clothes for each season. Just the other day, my wife commented, she's like, I never ever thought I would see you own so much flannel. I was like, wait, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, is it like red plaid, like with blue lines, lumberjack flannel, or
Oh, you know it, with the bib overalls underneath. I'm all in, man. I'm all in.
I mean, you got to pick your lifestyle here, and maybe that's. I sort of want to have us try something a little bit different for today's podcast. So I took longer than I probably should have looking at your LinkedIn profile recently, and I did notice that you've actually had quite a long career.
It has been, this year, it has been 30 years that I've been in the tech industry,
I feel like if we had some sound effects, those would be going off right now.
right? Because I don't know of many people who have been at it this long. I think it's a small group of people.
And that's to say that everyone should retire before they get to 30 years of experience.
No, absolutely not. Um, I think there's a proven path to doing this, but a lot of people don't know what it is. And so
Interesting.
that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I think first thing, because this conversation actually came up with someone I was talking with the other day. They're getting started in their tech career, and they said, I just want somebody to be honest with me. Like, what is it really like? And I said, not going to bullshit you. It's fucking hard. Like, put aside there's like great moments that keep you going, but it is hard work. But we have to like qualify hard work. Yes, it's hard work, but so is, laying asphalt on the highway in the desert in the middle of summer. Those are both hard work. They're just different types of hard work. So you kind of have to keep that in perspective, I think, during the hard years over a 30-year career.
I didn't think I would bring this up actually, but I thought it was sort of a joke initially when I had started that people burn out
Yeah.
at working at knowledge work, which is fundamentally what we're doing. As you mentioned, it's somehow similar, but still very different than the physical work you would put in to perform some sort of manual labor. Uh, it for sure is not a joke. And I used to think, oh yeah, I'm used to doing hard work at the high school, university level, whatever I invested my time in. It's not easy. I spent a lot of time studying, preparing for tests, etc. Uh, and I always I don't want to do that anymore. So I decided not to go to graduate school and try to actually start working. And yeah, I'm with you that I think just calling it hard work doesn't necessarily really clarify what you have to really put in to make even a short career.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that highlights. So I've like picked out like four common paths for tech careers. And so I'll highlight those real quick. The first one is you start your tech career, you do it for a few years, And then you kind of acknowledge at that point the level of effort that it's required to keep going at this. And so you move to something like a pre-sales engineering or a solutions engineer type role where it's still technical, but you just kind of, you're familiar with the concepts and you have the fundamentals, but you're not required to, learn all the different subcommands of operating a Kubernetes cluster and use those on a daily basis, right? So it's technical, but it's less technical.
I like that perspective. I mean, it's sort of like the one where you take the skills that you've learned over the beginning part of your career from a theoretical standpoint, or trying to figure out your way, and you're actually putting them into practice by focusing on that part of the delivery and less on learning new things.
Yeah, for sure. Like you apply those fundamentals, like basic things. Well, maybe basic's not the right word, but things like don't expose your database server with a public IP address. And so you use those lessons to help other people engineer good solutions, but you're not actually responsible for getting your hands on the keyboard and implementing them.
You have some tricks in your tool bag and mantras that you can repeat at maybe the right moment. And you're now someone that can actually share that advice after, I think like maybe even a 5-year mark.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one. What else?
Yeah. The next one that I commonly see is people moving from a technical role into a management role. And I think this one, we just see it in other industries, like if you start out as a bank teller, then you become like the manager of the local bank branch. And then, you work your way up through a career in management. And that's like the defined career path for every other industry. And so people just naturally apply it to ours. One of the things that I learned from that, though, is that being a manager is a completely different career path. It has very little to do with your technical skills, because to be a good manager, you need people skills. You need to understand what motivates your people and when they're struggling and how to get them to turn it around and how to communicate with them. Not some people respond to written communication, some respond to verbal communication, and you have to dissect and figure that out for each one of your employees, remember it for that employee, and then frame your conversations with them using that.
I feel like that bears repeating realistically, because it's sort of this area where I feel like in my career, people kept on saying, oh, you need to have soft skills to make this happen, and not really explain it in a way that resonated with an engineer or engineers. I feel like aren't really explained to what that difference in role is. And I think, you've done a good job hashing over that. It is quite the challenge, and it for sure is nowhere close to the same. I think for me, the language that I have jumped on in the past that has been helpful is you have more resources at your control to help deliver something of much greater scale. Like you're not going to build a skyscraper by yourself. You can hire as many people as you want to help you do that. What exactly do you do to make that happen? And in knowledge work, I feel like it's very difficult to wrap your head around what extra people will help with. I'm sure it's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you in your career. You ever get asked like, hey, Will, like we're not going at this as fast as we want to. Like, could you use some extra people?
Right. Yeah. And for me, most of the time, the answer is no, because then I've got to stop progress on it to get them into a productive state.
Yeah. I mean, and also like splitting the work and just figuring out like, I have in my head, it's organized in some way. And so moving into the management position is all about doing that, no hands-on, really, like how do I organize people to automatically achieve what I want? Okay. I got it.
Yeah. One of the things that helped me make that concrete in my head, because I think the word soft skills is the wrong word. I think that's misleading in it. But for about 5 years, I was a CrossFit coach outside of work. And to me, that taught me more about communication than anything I've ever done in my life, because you're in this scenario where you have people of varying skills trying to complete strenuous work for their own personal benefits, but at the same time, if they do it wrong, they could injure themselves, and that's the worst case scenario. But then, you add in peer pressure on top of that, because they may be standing next to someone doing the exact same movement with twice as much weight. So now they're feeling less confident because of that. And then let's up the pressure one more time, and let's put a running clock on there. So now we're going to judge you based on the time it takes you to complete this work. And so as a coach, you're looking out across this group of people and you see someone making a mistake. So you've got to make it across the gym to this person. You've got to break their mental thought process because they're just focused on that clock. You've got to interrupt that cycle, get their attention, and then figure out how to communicate to them quickly enough so that they don't injure themselves. So you're like, does this person respond to verbal cues? Do they respond to show and tell? Do they respond to feel, where I can like touch the middle of their back and say, don't bend this? If they do respond to feel and it's a person of the opposite sex, are they going to assume that I'm trying to hit on them and take it the wrong way? And you've got to process all of this stuff in a matter of seconds to prevent them from getting injured. And to me, that taught me a lot about soft skills and how to communicate. And I think those directly translate into a management career path.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I keep hearing that someone has an example that's somehow sport related. And I know CrossFit, I feel like, is in a weird area here, right? It's not necessarily a team sport.
Definitely not.
I mean, it is sort of for you. I mean, you're thinking of, as the coach, like, this is my group, this is my team. I need to get them to the finish line and helping them however that happens. And I was just starting to like develop these nightmare scenario where there's like a clock ticking down as a software developer. And someone's
right.
going to come and pat me on the back and say, hey, do this a little bit differently. But the team thing keeps coming up for me a lot. Like, I feel like I wasn't exposed to sports teams enough in a leadership capacity or understanding how to work with leaders in that. It's still very, especially where I came from, my culture. I'm an American initially, and so it's definitely task oriented, head down, focus on whatever the thing is that you need to do, irrelevant to the sport, even if there are other players that are on your team that are happening at the same moment. But over my career, having focused on that a lot, I definitely got a better understanding of what it means to make a team and to lead that team in knowledge-based work.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I can relate to that. I grew up in Texas in the 70s and 80s. So you either played football, basketball, or baseball, preferably all three. And I was one of those, and still am one of those uncoordinated people where if you want pure hilarity, just throw me a ball and expect me to catch it. But anyway, right? No, I'm over it now. I just like own it now. I'm like, yeah, that's never going to happen. I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we got the management position, future, basically
Yeah.
change your role long term.
Right. And I think that's important to acknowledge that you are specifically changing your expertise.
Yeah. It's interesting because there actually has been this mantra of like, don't put engineers don't force engineers into management position. And that's like one side of the spectrum. And the other side of the spectrum is, oh yes, management positions come after, being an individual contributor. So right. I hope there's like some sort of magic middle ground here where like there is some portion of the population who this is probably the path that you belong on.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other common path that I've seen, and I think the motivating factor behind all of these is, like you mentioned earlier, the continuous education thing. Tech is continuously changing. You're always behind. And so the third one that I've seen people pursue is just finding a nice comfy hole to hide in. So you get your job and then you figure out how this legacy component works and you just become the expert in that. And now you're kind of like indispensable because no one else wants to touch this thing, but it's critical to the business operations. And so you can just kind of carve out your defined work and you're just going to ride that out to retirement. And I'm not, And I'm not like saying that as a bad thing at all. This is a valid option, you know?
Yeah. Do you think there's like some secret to actually making that career happen? Like something that you should go and do to if that feels more comfortable to you? Because I mean, I know there's people out there that are like, I don't want to be a manager and I don't want to go into sales or even working with other teams and having to communicate across them is a challenge for me.
Yeah, for sure. Learn COBOL.
Yeah, I mean, hands-on, hard technical work is not the norm. Even like in my career, I have very rarely seen those people. I mean, I think it's less and less the case over time with new strategies having been discovered and then replicated across companies and then turned into tools that can be utilized. The complicated subsystem person who's the foremost expert in that thing, uh, number of roles I feel like has been decreasing over time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think that highlights the common denominator to all three of those strategies that causes people frustration in their career, because all three of them force you out of that continuous education mode. And more than likely, at some point, that job is going to end. So now you're re-entering the workforce, but you've let your technical skills lapse. And so now you're not interviewing at the level that you previously had because you don't have up-to-date tech skills.
Yeah, I mean, those three are either I changed my role, I did something with my skills. I'm not focusing on learning over and over again. So there must be other career paths out there that don't focus on switching out, but maybe focus on learning.
Yeah, which is kind of the path that I've taken over the last 30 years. Just kind of having the mantra, and it hasn't been this mantra from the beginning, it's evolved over time, but it's just waking up, and when I get out of bed in the morning, acknowledging I'm the dumbest fucker in tech right now, because since I quit work yesterday afternoon and got up this morning, technology has progressed, but here I was sleeping in bed. So now my job for today is to deliver value for my employer, do the thing that they're paying me to do, and level up my skills so that I'm going to be valuable to them tomorrow. And the focus is not so much on the employer of, oh, I've got to be a good employee so that they put a gold star on my forehead or whatever. The goal to all of this is I've got to provide for my family. You know, my job is to make sure that everyone in my family has a roof over their head, food on the table, and money to meet their needs. And this is the path that I've chosen to do that. And so continuous education is just one of two primary tools I use to do that. The first tool is active employment, and then the second tool is a continuous education so that I can have active employment tomorrow.
So there was a previous episode where I grilled you on mastermind groups and
Yeah.
people who can sort of challenge you on, as I quote, your bullshit. Uh, I feel like, that's a source of learning, at least feedback from the outside, but like how have you managed to actually pulled in new information and kept growing over the last 30 years? Was it like a conscious effort of like, I need to learn something this week. This is the thing I'm learning. Was it you were involved in some companies that maybe made it easier? Like was there a concerted effort? Was it just who you are as a person?
Probably a combination of all those. I think one of the driving factors has been, most of my career has been building early stage tech startups, and so all the early stage tech startups, you're not limited by previous technical decisions. And so software engineers tend to be aware of like, oh, hey, there's this new thing called Heroku, or this new thing called Vercel. And so then they use that, and I'm like, damn, all right, I got to learn that. And then you start to, if the company is successful, you start to hit the limits of that. So now it's like, okay, we're going to have to get off of this. What are they doing? Why is that the limiting factor? And what can I build that will work better than that? Which leads you into, cloud computing or Kubernetes or something like that. So it was kind of like just taking a step back to read the landscape and figure out where we're going and what was going to be the limiting factor in that path.
That's a really interesting perspective because I feel like I started my career on the opposite side. And when I was working at one of these companies, the thought I kept having to myself is, I feel like I'm learning dead frameworks, like things that are not going to forward my career in any way. And it wasn't like, let me force this company to introduce something that they definitely don't need, like Kubernetes, in order to put it on my resume. It was, let me find other companies that are doing something in a field that I care about that I could push forward. And so like switching your career every couple of years, I mean, I feel like has been this recent mantra of how people get promoted. But if you look at the reason why, I feel like the continuous learning is a good justification of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would have to say I probably have followed that almost subconsciously. In 30 years, I've never been with the same employer for more than 3 years.
This is going to be like recorded and then people may hear that. And how many years are you coming up on your current job, Will?
I've got 11 months to go there.
I think there's a wisdom there that, I ask people like, how long, like, do you plan on working at this company until you retire? And the answer is almost always no. And I'm like, okay, great. And right now you're like, the way you're acting or the path that you're taking or what you're focusing on is aligned with, I'm going to work there forever. So like, how many years out, you start playing this game of like, where is your career going? When is that point in which you think you will no longer work at that company? And I'm not asking you to, answer this for that point. But I think the interesting thing is you mentioned you focus in the startup world where there is rapid turnover or introduction of new tools and things change when you get to the scale phase and be like, okay, our product now works. We need to make some significant changes there, or the tools we're using run out. Have you ever heard of the concept of the pioneer, settler, and town planner?
No.
So it's sort of this mentality that someone takes on, and not that you are only one of these. There is this idea of you're doing some greenfield work. You are a pioneer in the Wild West, in an previously mapped out region of technology or whatever you're doing. And then there's this stage in the middle, which is the settler. You can imagine there are some things that are built. You're coming in and making some changes there to improve it. And then there's the town planner, which is like over optimization of everything. We have to, in order to scale to millions of users, millions of requests per second, et cetera. I can imagine that the pioneer is sort of stuck on the learn new tools, but not necessarily learn new things for your own benefit. And obviously the optimizer is working in very fixed framework. So it does sound like maybe you fall into the middle of this where you're coming in, you have some experiences and you're really helping out the organizations, but you're pulling out all that information and knowledge that you can and being as effective as you are would be in that role.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of the reason why the 3-year mark has worked out so well for me, because in the life cycle of a startup, that's kind of like a 3-year max thing, and it's funny because I actually gave a talk several years ago at DevOps Europe that talked about this life cycle that sounds very similar to what you're describing, but I used it as like building. I actually used the analogy of the Wright brothers in the aviation industry on it, but like a startup, you have your first phase of the startup where you have this idea. And so your job there is to launch that idea as fast as possible, because there's always a difference between the product that you built and the product that your customers wanted. And so your job in phase 1 is to launch something so you can figure out what that gap is and then close that gap. And then now that you're building the product that your customers want, phase 2 is actually building a factory that their job is to create that product. So you're building assembly lines, and putting in teams and figuring out how to make this thing scalable and redundant and profitable. And then once you figure that out, you move into phase 3, where you just operate the factory. You just operate the money-making machine until the end of the company. And each of those phases requires a completely different type of person. And someone who's really good at phase 1 is probably going to struggle in phases 2 and 3 and vice versa and all those things. So I think at that point, you kind of put yourself in a position where you're there to achieve a certain thing. And then once that's achieved, you have to go for two reasons. One, because you're not good at what comes next. And two, if you are good at that, you probably enjoy doing it and wouldn't enjoy doing the subsequent phase.
What I heard was I have some great wisdom in a talk that I prepared, and now I want to go and watch that. You got like a website where you've got your talks listed or something?
No, I probably should. But I can find a link to that talk because I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds pretty spot on because I feel like self-identification here, like I see a pattern, right? I care about learning, I care about learning new things, and also who am I? What kind of person am I? What sort of career do I want to have? And so now I got to ask you, did you ever think that you'd have such a long career? Was it something that you had planned for in some way?
No, definitely was not planned. Definitely wasn't planned. And I think that's really important to highlight for people who are just starting their careers. You don't have to have the next 30 years mapped. You probably shouldn't have the next 30 years mapped because you're going to learn things in the first 5 years of your career that will influence how you want those remaining years to go. So you don't have to know everything. You just have to keep moving forward.
When you started, what was the picture like for you? Did you have some sort of foggy vision of what sort of work you would be doing even in 5 years or longer term?
No, not a clue. Like my first job in computing technology. Prior to that, I installed and programmed telephone systems. But I had a hobbyist interest in computers, so I set up the Novell network for the company I worked for. And for those of you who don't know, Novell was a computer server networking platform in the early 90s that was ultimately beat out by Microsoft. But yeah, I started installing that. And then there was sort of a natural progression there. We were installing the telephone cables, and then desktop computing became popular. So we started installing networking cables, and then the customers were like, well, hey, you put in the networking cables, can you install the routers and switches? And I'm like, oh, sure. Well, actually our sales guy said, sure. And we're like, damn, okay, I guess we'll go figure that out. And then, they would bring in the computer guys, and the servers wouldn't work, and they would instantly blame the network. And so I had to learn enough about how servers worked so that I could prove that it wasn't the network issue at all. Funny how some stories never change, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that like what you're doing today? Isn't that like your official job description?
Pretty much, yeah. Just the actual commands I run is different. Yeah, and then we had a company that they had a Microsoft SQL database server, and they couldn't figure out how to work it. The people that were supposed to be working on it for them were unresponsive. And so I just happened to be there working on the computer network one day, and they were like, hey, can you take a look at it? I'm like, yeah, I can take a look at it. And this was back whenever they shipped physical manuals with the software. So I took the Microsoft SQL Server 6.5 book home with me that weekend and read it to cover, and then finally figured out their problem. And then they offered me a full-time job as a database administrator, and things have just gone on from there. So no, this was not planned by any means. This was like the Forrest Gump path to career growth.
I mean, I saw some fear there. Like if I had ever been in a similar circumstance, like having opened the DBA book, I feel like I would have closed it very quickly.
Yeah, I think I was probably preconditioned to that because my original job out of high school was as a nuclear engineer in the Navy. And so it's very much lots of books to read and very high stakes for penalties, because it's a nuclear power plant, so they're kind of finicky. And so, but after doing that, like my risk tolerance was pretty high, like oh, hey, I'm not going to kill every living creature in a 25-mile radius. Cool.
Yeah.
We're golden.
How
There
bad
is.
can it be, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You just release the software. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever, right? It just
Just
can't be that
release it.
bad.
No one's going to die.
Yeah, no one actually may find out, and you're not planning on staying there very long anyway. So in 3 years, I mean, there is for sure this problem in tech where people are often more rewarded for switching companies
Oh,
in
for
doing
sure.
so. And so you work on a project, it's challenging, doesn't go well, it gets completed, you learn something, then you leave and you're celebrated for that work. You can talk about it, what you did, et cetera, and new place loves it. And then 10 years later, whatever you built like causes the first company to crash and burn, right? And like, there's no one to be held accountable for that. And
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, the engineer should not be the one held accountable for that. If one person could be responsible for taking down the company, there's a problem with the process. I hope these words don't get turned into some sort of like insurance policy that engineers have to take out in order for them to start working.
I know. The attorneys have the sound bite. That's all they needed.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Shavala, I am not an expert.
Right.
I have no idea what I'm saying. Please do not take my words in any official capacity.
Yeah, we're gonna append one of the drug commercial disclaimers at the end of this episode where the guy's reading it like auctioneer speed about all the legal disclaimers about this episode.
I mean, I will say, if someone wants to pull me into a court case as a subject matter expert, I'm happy to repeat those things. But you can find my fees on my webpage for how much I charge for this activity.
For sure. No, but that is a good point. An important point to acknowledge is that switching jobs is your best path forward to increasing your salary, with the caveat of you don't want to burn any bridges along the way, which is pretty easy to do. I mean, just be like a stand-up person, you know? I think that's fairly low bar.
Yeah, I will say that it may be challenging to get invested in whatever architecture or platform you're building enough to understand or deal with challenging problems if you keep switching too soon. Like, you may be eliminating some of the most challenging pieces of technology that you would be able to invest in or learn about because it requires understanding so many different moving pieces at a company. So I think it's something to be aware of. And honestly, I tend to think of it as it's a negotiation tool that you can use if you're struggling in your current job to say, hey, I think I should change something while I'm still working here, rather than believing I have to leave to have everything be different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we had Kelsey Hightower on the show a couple months ago, he did a really great job of highlighting that, that your first few years of your career should be broad and touch many things. But then at some point you find something that you're really going to focus in on. And so at that point you go deep into that vertical.
Here's a maybe spicy take. If you never get fired in the first 5 years of your career, you're not pushing the boundary enough.
If you never get fired for the right reasons, I think that's important to call out.
People definitely get laid off and fired for the wrong reasons, and there's not a lot that you can do about that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure.
No, I was just thinking, if you get fired for bearing your ass to the HR person, that's probably not what we're referencing here.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm talking about like accountability in your job and your official job responsibility and role. Yeah, for sure. Because we don't know everything, and I feel like pushing that and disagreeing with other people is natural. And I think that some companies see disagreement as not a positive, and that everyone should be happy and work together all the time. And I feel like disagreement actually does breed some interesting conclusions, interesting technology, good decisions that come out of that. So just being agreeable isn't necessarily the path forward for learning new things in your career. You don't be scared to be the odd black sheep out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Because either you're right or you learn something. So there's really no downside to that.
Yeah, for sure. you started as with the cable lines and got to DBA, and now you've jumped to, I don't actually know what your official role is now. I saw it said like senior DevOps lead. I imagine you're responsible for more things than you're comfortable with, but maybe you could just give me a good summary of what that looks like.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm responsible for building the infrastructure that allows the software engineers at our company to ship their code reliably and safely with fault tolerance and scalability, even when they don't know what those things mean. And that's kind of how I view it, which, is still vague in itself, but technically it means, building out infrastructure in AWS or GCP or something like that, and using CI/CD so that they can focus on the things that they do well and produce a product that I know will run well.
Are you like on some sort of autonomous team that focuses on this area? Is there like a team lead of that team?
Yeah, I'm the team lead of the team.
So there's like people that pseudo report to you that you're responsible for their future careers there.
Yeah, which is a bit of a transition for me, because it's less hands on the keyboard, more focused on, some of those softer skills that we were talking about earlier.
And like, as having had the 30-year career, like helpful for giving wisdom to your fellow team members?
I hope so.
I don't know, because sometimes I'm in this position and I worry like, are my experiences even relevant? One of the ones I really struggle with is I've experienced this problem and it was a failure in some regard and I learned from it.
Yeah.
And like, should I help someone else through that same experience or give them advice so that they can avoid it and never feel the repercussions of their action?
Yeah, for sure. I think a key component to that is being aware of the back in my day syndrome, because as you get older, it's got to be genetic or something, because you'll find yourself standing on the front porch yelling at the kids about back in my day, and it's just not relevant. So I think one of the key aspects to that is to make sure that your own skills are relevant with today's current technology, and then guide your use of that based on things that you've learned in the past. So you have to have like a foot in both camps. You've got to have a foot in the past and a foot in the future to have a somewhat relevant perspective.
I like that you jumped into the puddle here. We'll say quicksand, mud pit, about the future, because I'm going to ask you. There's been a lot of flux, I feel like, in the technology industry today,
Yeah.
especially in the last year. And I don't want to say that the layoffs have anything to do with it, or that AI specifically related to it in general, or whether or not that will change. Like, are you ignoring this? It's like you've seen this happen so many times in your career. It's just another time. Or is it like a fundamental change here that people need to be aware of that could affect how their careers are evolving? And maybe the second follow-up here is like, are you just hoping that you'll retire before you have to worry about it?
No, I'm currently treating it as just one of many cycles I've seen in the past. And for me, the key to navigating these cycles is to not pin your identity to a specific thing. Like, like I'm not identified as the expert in Kubernetes, because no business cares about Kubernetes. What they care about is solving their problems. And to give you a specific example from my startup history, I'll start working with a startup and they've got 10,000 monthly active users on their app. I'm not there to talk to them about how you can use Kubernetes or Docker container-based images or monitoring your SLAs and your response times. I'm there to talk to them about how do I get you from 10,000 monthly active users to 100,000 monthly active users, because then they can do the math and say, oh, well, at $10 a user, if they can increase that generates this much additional revenue. And so now you're solving a specific problem that they do care about, and they don't really care about the technology you use to do that.
there's something very special about that advice. So you're not just the DevOps lead at Polygon, you also advise startups. And as you mentioned, they care about getting to market and increasing their revenue, validating their idea, but then also scaling up. And so you're basically saying, like, I know technology, and the right answer in any of those conversations is not like use this technology, like use this thing. It's understanding where they're at and saying this is the thing that you need to change to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you hire a carpenter, the carpenter doesn't show up saying, "Hey, you got to hire me. I have a 16-ounce claw hammer." You're like, "I don't give a shit. I'm trying to build a house." And so they're going to talk to you about building the house. They may in fact have a 16-ounce claw hammer, but that's just a tool that they use. And I try to apply the same thing. I may have Kubernetes skills or DBA skills, but that's just a tool that I use to solve the problem that your business has.
No, that really resonates with me, actually. I remember seeing a pretty good conference talk video about selling toilets at a department store, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. And you go in there and like, I need a toilet for my house. And there's like 20 toilets that are sitting there. It's like, well, which one do I buy? And
you got to test them.
Sorry, I feel like I'm unfamiliar with this concept. You test them in the store, Will?
Why else would they have them sitting out? I mean, a little privacy curtain would be nice, but hey, whatever.
He's seen worse. Apparently, that's not for everyone. It takes a special kind of skill to be able to pull that off.
Right.
So the point is like you're not the foremost expert in whatever those things are. You have some problem, and how the toilet works isn't necessarily what you care about, or as the carpenter that you're hiring, like what the code is for how thick your your walls need to be, or the support beams, how the electrical wiring needs to be done. You don't really care about.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that's a good analogy there, that the expert in that, is there to ask you the things that you do know about and guide you to the right solution. Like, how much room do you have? Oh, you've only got 16 inches width, so the 24-inch model gets ruled out immediately. So focus on the parts of the problem that they do understand, and then use your expertise of the product to help them make the right selection.
So I feel like what we're talking about is becoming that expert over time by focusing on learning. And so irrelevant of how the market shifts or what new tools are available, it could be just figuring out, how do I apply that to what I already know? It's not like a different field. It's not something you have to switch. Like, I'm going to change my role now, but how do I use these things to help me deliver more effectively? Or is there something I can learn about that? But you do a lot of things at the same time. It's like, you do the advising, you're a podcast host. How do you find time for all of that?
It takes a lot of time. And I think that's something that has to be accounted for, like a 30-year career in tech is not a 40-hour-a-week commitment. It's usually 40 plus hours at the job that pays your salary, but then you have to dedicate time above and beyond that to update your skill set so that you're relevant for tomorrow. And I think that's one of the big misunderstood lessons from college, is it's not about the education as much as it is about building good learning habits that you can use for the rest of your life.
Okay, I only have bad learning habits for sure. So like lay one on me here.
I probably do too. I just put in the time to compensate for that. Like whenever I was in nuclear engineering school, you spent 40 hours a week in class, and then you spent another 30 to 40 hours a week after class studying. And so I just built those, bulldog skills where you just keep chewing and chewing and chewing without regard for anything else. And it's cost stuff along the way, like I used to love playing, I still probably love playing computer games, but I don't know, because I don't do that a lot anymore. Same thing with, like playing guitar. It's just not something I have time for very frequently. And so there are trade-offs, but according to my life goals, which is to build a life where I've provided for my family the best that I could and helped set them up for success, it was a fair trade-off.
Yeah, I mean that's a good thing to keep coming back to because it's your like personal identity is not like where you're working or the tool that you're working with. You have some other life goal that you're trying to achieve, and not getting too attached to your current situation is the only way that you can move forward. I mean, there was no, even in the four examples of the different progression paths you can have as an engineer, being the foremost expert requires a very specific niche, and there's just not that many of them. All of them require fundamentally changing something as time goes on.
Yeah, I think one good way to keep this in perspective is you're going to work hard in a career in tech, but it comes with rewards, and those rewards, I think, are the way that you finance your true goals in life. Because when you die, you're going to meet your creator, and they're going to say, "Hey, we gave you the most state-of-the-art vehicle in the known universe. We gave you a human body. What did you do with it?" And saying I was a team lead for Microsoft, I think, is probably not going to cut it as the answer.
I think it's self-reflection. So, you get to decide for yourself if that cuts it or not. I think,
Fair
at the end of
point.
the day, we're our own judges there.
Yeah.
At least I like to believe that, because otherwise I think I'm going to be in trouble, because your version of how you studied for nuclear engineering is not how I approached my university time. I had a very different approach there, so that we're not going to get into this podcast today.
I can take a guess.
I mean, it was filled, with as much struggle. I used to think that getting burned out in the job was some sort of joke, and I'll be the first one to admit this, that it was not something that I thought actually would happen. And then it happens to you, and you struggle with it a lot because of whatever you were doing, the strategy you had, and it really has this psychological and physiological impact on how you deal with things. And so really being mindful of that it is hard work for sure. There is no, like, this is an easy job. You mentioned rewards, and I feel like I was asked very many times in my pre-career and career, are you going to make a lot of money? And I always thought, yeah, well, I'll probably make some money, right? Like, it's probably not as much as like a lawyer or a doctor or whatever else I came to mind with. But after working in tech for not as long as you will, I have actually the belief that you can make quite a lot of money in this industry. I feel like I've seen some people say they total compensation is over $1 million.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Yeah.
It's not the norm.
No.
But yeah, there's a lot out there for sure. And so I like your framing that it's not just easily achievable. If you want to get to the next level and change really your compensation, it requires putting in a lot more effort. And maybe the company you're working for can support you. Hopefully you don't have to put in a lot of more hours to make that happen. But your hobby, if you're a person that likes to learn, seems like you're really well fit for that, right? I can learn what I care about outside of the job and focus on that, and then bring that back and use that in my career.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's important, is to have a reason to learn, because like saying, oh, I have to learn this for this particular paycheck is going to lead to burnout, guaranteed. You've got to tie it back to some other reason in your life.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I often struggle with giving good advice over is when early career engineers come to me and say, hey, what should I learn? And I'm just like, there are too many things to possibly that you could be learning. Like, which one do you care the most about? Which one is well aligned with who you want to be or who you are or how you think about problems? That's the thing that you should go after. Don't ask me, should I learn AWS or GCP or Azure? I mean, I'm going to tell you to learn AWS, but that's sort of a different bucket. Realistically, it may not help you get a job, right? You know, what I think is important isn't necessarily what is important for you. So really focusing on what you actually cared about. You cared about learning. You took what you were currently doing and said, you know, it was always a yes, it sounds like, you know, oh, we're doing this thing. Can we do this other thing as well? Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's jump into that. That's scary.
Not really. What's the worst that could happen?
No one's dying.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Yeah. One of the ways I like to guide people when that question comes up, is just tell them, go get a junk PC, build a web server, put it online, build a website, and make it public. You know, and then you're going to take them all the way through the entire software delivery lifecycle end to end, and tell them at some point in there, you're going to enjoy part of that process and you're going to hate other parts of that process. Focus on the part that you enjoyed.
There is actually, if people are looking for something specific, there's some documentation out there around what's called the Cloud Resume Challenge. It's basically what Will described. It helps guide you through the different technologies that you could potentially be using and say, here, solve this problem, then solve this problem, then solve this problem very specifically. And through that, you can take lots of time understanding what you're actually doing and why. Like, it's not about getting through it as soon as possible. No one's going to be reviewing your work, but it is a great thing because the outcome is hey, look, I built all these things to automatically update my resume and it's on a public website. And you can even show that as a project that had some value. Whereas someone who tells me, oh yeah, I built like a recommendation engine that shows like movies or whatever on a web page, I'm going to be like, why? Why did you build that? Here's my first question in an interview. Like, tell me about something you really enjoyed doing and then why you did it. And the answer can't be, oh, I just needed to do something, right? I want to understand your thought process on understanding business value or driving forward. I had a problem I need to solve, and here's the solution.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it right there. You had a problem to solve. You know, why was that a problem? Why was this the solution that you chose? Yeah. Because that's what all businesses are doing, is they're trying to solve problems.
I think there's another thing here, and it's the nuances involved. Like, if it's a concrete thing that actually happened to you and there was a lot of discussions behind it, those are interesting conversations. Those are interesting stories, how you were engaged in that, what you learned about doing that. And if it's sort of a made up hypothetical problem, then you don't really understand the trade-offs. There aren't any trade-offs to make. It's whatever you want at every bend. You can't really say, well, we had 100,000 users, so we had to do things this way. Or we only had 10 users, and so we could do things differently. If you just have a made-up number of users in your head, I have no idea how resilient and reliable the project that you did had to be.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing you can do is, if you don't have a problem that seems particularly interesting to you, is talk to people that you know. A specific example was a buddy of mine just recently has been taking Muay Thai lessons, but the software that the company uses for like billing membership and tracking classes and all that kind of stuff was just really frustrating for him to use. So he went to the owner and said, hey, can I just build you a platform that's specific to the classes you teach? Because like, he was using some generic gym membership website, SaaS, that was, you know, for anything from like Planet Fitness to, you know, your local CrossFit thing. And so it wasn't really working for their specific needs. So he's currently working on building one specific to Muay Thai gyms.
He really took that opportunity that he found and did something with it. I think being open outside of your 9 to 5 or whatever you want to call it, in the remote world or hybrid world, the hours during the day aren't fixed. You know, whatever you're doing in the downtime, I think are great opportunities to invest more in. They're the things that you already care about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so it's multifaceted win for him. He gets a better experience as a customer of this gym, but he's also getting more skills at solving problems for a business, and at the same time working on advancing or keeping his own technical skills up to date as well, all from the
So
same project.
yeah, there's a lot there to go on. Like you can keep investing in that more and more, and you can turn it into a business and sell it to the next gym and the next gym and the next gym, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So since you've got up there in years now, are you starting to think about like I'm going to retire at some point, or is this like I'm going to be doing this till like I'm going to be on the podcast host until the day I die?
Yeah, that's been coming up more and more frequently in my thought process recently. I might be close to the end of my career.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anything that's weighing to help make that decision? Like, was it a direction? Like you like what you've achieved, you're getting out early? Is it you said you had a main goal in your why you're working, and if you don't need the money, then you won't necessarily do that. Is it about I want to play games more, right? You said get back to it.
Yeah, it's definitely not I want to play games more, because I about gosh, what it's been 7, 8 maybe years ago, I hit this point where I don't need to work for the money anymore. And so I kind of retired at that point. And after about 30 days, my wife was like, look, we got to talk. You can get a job. You can go away forever. You can get a mistress. I don't care what you do, but you cannot sit around the house anymore. And she had a valid point, because I'm not the type of person who can have nothing to do. Like, worst case scenario for me would be retire, and the only thing I have to look forward to would be like a daily round of golf. So I think it'll probably change for me in the near future, but I just don't know what that is going to look like.
So I know that you've said a lot of things here. There's a lot of secret nuggets of wisdom that have been added in, and so I really
Well, I hope so.
yeah, no, I mean anyone that's been doing something as long as you have collects those, and picking your brain is always a good time. Well,
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully I think that's one of my goals, because like I mentioned, my original goal starting this 3 decades ago was to provide for my family, and I've done well at that. I mean, given where I started, I've done really, really well at that. And now I'm like, well, what's the next goal? And I think part of that is, hey, I did okay at this for 3 decades. What can I share, and how can I share it with people who are earlier in their journey? Like, what can I do or say to help them build on top of the mistakes that I made, so that they don't have to repeat those mistakes?
I hear a book coming.
Maybe. I don't know. Make it a New York Times bestseller, because seemingly every book is.
I mean, it's just statistically significant that like you write a book, and then the only way you know about the book is that if it's a New York Times bestseller. And
Right.
so all the other books, like you never even hear about. So there are no books that are not New York Times bestseller. They secretly get deleted from the internet.
Yeah. Like, how demoralizing is that for an author? Like, God, I can't even write a best-selling book according to the New York Times.
I mean, I think, if that's something you're really interested in, you can ask the actors and directors that make video content that shows up on streaming platforms, because the streaming platforms remove everything from there that don't do well. And so I can imagine, as a content creator, getting your stuff just terminated like that is that's a special kind of newfound hatred towards the current world order.
Right. No doubt.
Well, then maybe we should move over to picks.
Let's do some picks. You're starting at me to start. I feel like you interviewed me this time, so I feel like I should go first.
You should definitely go first.
All right. I have been reading The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida. I think it's Deida, Deida. It's a cool book. It's probably going to be controversial for most or for some people, but even if it is, I think it's worth a read because it does a really good job of like highlighting some of the things we talked about here today, like what's your goal in life and what's your role in achieving that goal. And I think one of the common themes through it is whenever you have challenges in the relationships of your life, it's your fault. It's not anyone else's fault. It's either your fault because you screwed up, or your fault because you didn't set expectations correctly, or your fault because you didn't guide the scenario at the right time. But it's really good at reflecting on that and removing blaming from your vocabulary. Like instead of blaming someone else, you're like, yeah, that was my fault. I should have done this instead, and we would have never been in that situation. So,
I mean, I see this both being more healthy and also potentially less healthy, depending on how you know, approach the situation. I mean, there's a lot to be said about not like playing the victim, right? That
right, yeah,
you could have impacted that. Like if you don't get promoted, you know, you could have done more to make that happen.
yeah. I think, you know, like one thing to keep in mind as you read it is if you've ever read Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning. Is that the right title? He was a Jewish doctor who was sent to a Nazi concentration camp in World War II, and then later he wrote this book about the positive aspects of that. Not that there were positive aspects of that, but the fact that he's like, you know, we're in this brutal, nightmarish situation that's seemingly out of our control. But you know what I can control? I can control my thoughts.
Wow,
And
that's deep.
yeah. So if you haven't read Viktor Frankl, Search for Meaning, I think is the title. That's a great, great, great book. Like must read for every person on the planet type book.
Okay. So he's got, maybe there's two picks there.
Maybe, yeah, two picks.
So mine's also a book because I'm lame, but I will share this that I've almost run out of books that I feel like I'm okay recommending for people to read. So very soon I'm going to have to move over to a completely different genre of content. I'm not sure what that's going to be yet. My book pick is it's called One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. And it's an old book. I think it's like 1962 or something like that. And it has nothing to do with software engineering or knowledge work. It has to do about how to invest in the market to get better returns. And you should not take the advice in the book as far as investing in the market because it's so old that everyone's already done this. Everyone's already found the advice and knows like how to apply it effectively. But the advice is value-based investments. That's understanding what the core value is with something that you would invest in, how much value you would get out of it, and what the return could be. So not speculating on what would happen. And I find that I get a lot of inspiration on how I can change my mindset when I'm learning things from nonfiction or even sometimes fiction outside of the tech industry, outside of leadership. And so I found a lot in this because it made me realize, okay, you know, what am I doing? What do I want to invest in myself that can give me returns? You know, what do I care about fundamentally as a person, or what am I good at? And then leaning into that more. And so I think it's a great book. It's also was super helpful for me as well.
Right on. And I'm going to highlight something you said, like talking about books, like I mean, we're both old enough, you know, where there was this stigma of people who read, you know, the high school football team was going to come running around, go nerd, and then beat your ass. But there's nothing wrong with reading. Like it's probably the most important thing you can do with your life because every problem you will ever face in your life, we've got books going back thousands of years. Someone somewhere has written about a very similar problem and how they solved it.
If we're going to go there, then I'll share my wisdom here. I always hated reading books. I thought it was the worst. And that was because the books that you have access to or are forced to read, at least from my perspective, were not good books. So,
Yeah.
what you pick up in through your academic career, I didn't like it all. And so it gave me the view that all books were bad.
Yeah.
But as Will said, there is definitely inspiration that can come from things that you didn't know were out there. So if you do have that mindset, try doing something you don't like at least 10% of the time, and maybe it'll change your mind.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're struggling with where to start, I think starting with older books is better because the barrier to publishing was much higher 10 years ago. Nowadays, anyone with a PDF can release a book. And so the barrier to entry leads to potentially lower quality books. But if you go back, like 2000s and before, the barrier to getting a book published was pretty tough. And so the quality, I think, tends to reflect that.
No, I think that's a really good point. Just because there's a book published doesn't mean it's good. Like you can
Right.
disagree with the book, it can be bad. Not something that you want to read, and it's okay to get rid of that and put it down. But not all books are the same, I guess, is the wisdom.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. Therapy session over.
Whole life we counted in just 1 hour there.
Yeah, we'll just get a transcript of this, submit it to my insurance company, and bill it as a therapy session. You're getting paid for this episode, Warren.
Well, I only do things for free or for my actual rate, so this probably wouldn't cover it. So I'm gonna have to.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But if you want the actual invoice claim, I'm happy to send that over to you.
Oh, for sure, tax deduction. All right. Thank you for this episode. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate your time and your questions. Thank you to everyone listening. And if you have thoughts, comments, ideas, further questions, you know how to find me.